Quick intro. In general, test automation includes many tools and techniques for many different purposes: code analysis, link checking, load performance testing, code coverage, unit testing. This list goes on and on. We'll take a look at one specific kind of test automation of regression testing. The purpose is to warn you about the dangers of incorrectly done test automation and share some thoughts on how to do test automation right. Here is a typical Silicon Valley story. A story about the merciless automator, Benny M. In our beloved share lane, we've accumulated 78 test suites. It hurts to think about it, but somebody has to execute them. It hurts even more to know that after each major release, the number of test suites keeps growing. Somebody comes up with an idea to hire a test automation engineer. In a couple of weeks, he's hired. His name is Benny M. The QA manager calls a special meeting during which Benny is presented very much like the savior of humanity. When he's asked to speak, Benny gives a simple yet powerful one-liner, "I'm going to automate it all." How in the world can somebody not fall in love with a person like that? Benny tells us that he is an expert in Selenium WebDriver, and he uses Python to do the programming. All right. After 1 month, Benny makes a presentation, and what a presentation it is. He pushes a button, and in some magical way, the Selenium opens up new Firefox window, enters a URL in the address bar, and clicks Go. Next, on the web page, it types an email and a password, clicks Login, makes a purchase, and at the end, it compares the expected and actual results. Witnesses of the miracle give Benny a standing ovation. Benny nods like a person who humbly accepts well-deserved admiration and retires to his quarters, while we, mere mortals, gather at the cappuccino machine to make our prediction. It looks like in a couple of months, we'll have all of our 78 test suites automated. No more sleepless nights, just press the button and go to the bar. One word, magic. But when we enter the regression stage of test execution and ask Mr. M to run his automation, he says that the UI has changed, and so his automation needs to be updated too. For example, when Benny was writing his test script for the registration flow, we had a button for login called Login, but the developers made some changes and that button is now named Log On, so the automation scripts must be updated to comply with that change. "Come on," says Benny, "I'll fix it in no time." He spends another 2 weeks making fixes, and on the day before the go-no-go meeting, he finally runs 2 out of 10 automated test suites. With the next release, we have the same story, and the QA manager decides to fire Benny and hire 2 black box testers who will be much cheaper and much more effective. The inconvenient truth is that there are many cases when millions of dollars are wasted until management realizes that something isn't really working here. What exactly was the problem with ShareLane test automation? Was it Selenium WebDriver? No. Selenium is just a tool. Each tool is effective as long as it's properly applied for a certain purpose under certain conditions. If you use a hammer instead of a screwdriver to open the back of your Rolex, it's not the hammer's problem if your Rolex is smashed to pieces. Was it Benny? Yes and no. Benny is definitely something. For example, he should have never promised to automate 100% of regression tests, and he should have never attempted to automate flows that are prone to frequent modifications. On the other hand, Benny is a good programmer, but we didn't give the correct direction to his boiling energy. More precisely, we didn't give him any direction at all. So, was it us? Yes. Once we made a decision that test automation was necessary, we had to develop the correct approach towards it. We didn't do this. Instead, we chose the easy way, hire a dude who would come and solve our problems. It didn't work out, and we can only blame ourselves. But during the process of blaming, we can learn a lesson or two to help us avoid the same mistakes in the future. Let us share with you some thoughts and examples regarding test automation that we've learned the hard way. Please pay attention. What to automate versus how to automate. Test automation of regression testing comes in 2 forms. 1. Helper tools. Let's call them helpers. 2. Programs for automated regression testing. Let's call them automation scripts. The purpose of helpers is to automate concrete repetitive manual tasks. Account creator, or Give testers the essential means to perform testing. Credit card generator. The purpose of automation scripts is to execute regression test cases and report the results. On the high level, test automation consists of two parts. Part 1, a certain task, for example, execute test case 1 and report results. Part 2, a certain automation program used to automate that task, for example, Benny's Selenium script that executes test case number 1 and reports results. The question, what to automate, is equivalent to the question, what tasks shall we automate? Brain positioning. In many cases, it's harder to select a good candidate for automation, in other words, some task worthy to be automated, than to perform the automation itself. You can pick up Python skills within days, but it takes years of experience to be able to predict whether automating a certain task will result in saving or wasting a company's money. We, at ShareLane, invited a fiasco with test automation because we didn't ask Benny how he would select candidates for automation, or in other words, what criteria he would use to single out test cases that were worthy to be automated. The most important criterion for test automation is the stability, maturity of the software to be tested. That criteria should be applied every time when we evaluate some part of our application for automation eligibility. Take a quick look at the test case below. Don't execute it. As you remember, there were several problems with the test case, one of which was that the maintainability might become a nightmare. For example, we have to modify the test case if the Make Payment button is renamed Order. Therefore, we made it modular by doing several things, one of which was to appeal to the common sense of the test case executor. In other words, we assumed that a human could figure out what to do if we just wrote login as an instruction. Problem number 1. Whatever tool we use to write test automation, we cannot rely on its common sense because the program is just a set of instructions. Therefore, when software changes, the instructions for test automation must be changed too. Hence, we return to our original problem, maintainability, but in this case, it's maintainability of test automation. Problem number 2. It's a hassle to modify the steps inside a test case, but it's much more painful and time-consuming to modify rewrite test automation. When you modify your test case, you just retype the steps inside that test case, but when you modify your test automation, you have to do the programming. Thus, maintainability is the number one issue when we create test automation. But why do we have an issue of maintainability in the first place? Simple. Because the software to be tested was subject to changes. Change means maintenance. No change means no maintenance. So, it really is simple. The best test case to be automated is a test case that tests software that is not subject to change. Problem number 3. In a startup environment, when the modifications made to software are frequent and dramatic, in many cases we might simply decide to totally redesign the UI or even replace our old product with an absolutely different one. Test engineers cannot stop software development just to make that software more suitable for test automation. What are the chances for further employment of the test automation engineer who approaches a product manager and says, "You know, all your modifications really break my test automation. Can you just calm down with your creativity and let me do my job?" Frequent modifications to software are inevitable, especially in a startup environment. This means that frequent maintenance of the test automation that tests that software is also inevitable. By the way, here is a good analogy about the relationship between software maturity and test automation. Parents usually don't buy $200 shoes for 3-year-old children. Why? Because a 3-year-old's feet will grow in several months and that $200 will be a waste of money. By way of analogy, it doesn't make sense to invest seriously in test automation for young, constantly changing software. Helpers. Helpers are tools that assist the manual execution of test cases. You've already had many chances to use ShareLane helpers, Account Creator, and Credit Card Generator. No wonder helpers are loved by everyone. In many, if not the majority of cases, the helpers are the most effective, useful, and economical type of test automation. Helpers are usually the first pieces of test automation in the software company. Why? Because manual testers usually have a very good idea about small things that can make their life easier. So, if there is a person who can help with test automation, it's natural that he is asked to automate those little things. Let's look at account creation. There are special test cases that we use to precisely test the account creation flow, but in all other cases, we just need a new account to use for testing. So why not automate the repetitive, boring task of generating a new account? There are also situations where testing is not possible without helpers. For example, when we need to use credit cards. But why are helpers the cheapest type of test automation? Mainly because there is usually no or very little maintenance required. The reason is simple: helpers don't test software. Therefore, if the software changes, the helpers don't necessarily need to be changed. Example: if a programmer completely rewrites the checkout flow the helper used to generate credit cards doesn't need to be changed, because whatever the checkout flow is, the credit card attributes, for example, 16 digits in number, stay the same. Of course, there are cases when the helper's code needs some maintenance. Example: sometimes we have to change the helper's code, for instance, when there is an expansion of the tested software. So we must update the credit card generator if we plan to accept another credit card, for example, Discover. By the way, there are also cases when the helper's code relies on the tested software's code. For example, account creator uses lib.py, createaccount.py imports QA, lib.py, that imports lib.py. In that case, test automation engineer should exercise extra caution because he will not have full control over that helper, and that helper would likely require more maintenance compared to helper that doesn't depend on tested software. Brain positioning. If your test automation code must rely on tested software code, use API, Application Program Interface, instead of UI for your automation. API is a way software parts talk to each other. APIs are also subject to change, but as a rule, UI is changed more often, and automated API calls provide more stability during execution than UI-based automation because API calls don't use any web browsers. Here is some simple arithmetic about helpers. Below is the initial data regarding account creator. It took the test automation engineer about 30 minutes to write and test account creator. It takes 4 seconds to create a new user account and do an auto login with account creator. It takes about 1 minute to create a new user account and log in manually. Let's assume that ShareLane has 10 testers. On average, each tester creates 20 new accounts daily. That means that 52,000 minutes or 866 hours are needed for account creation annually. With automation, it takes only 1/15 of that time, which is 58 hours. And note that this requires only a tiny effort to create an account with Account Creator. Therefore, the delta is 808 hours. If testers make $45 an hour on average, that's $36,360 in savings per annum. So, it looks like 30 minutes spent to write Account Creator was well spent. By the way, some helpers automate tasks that require hours of hard, concentrated, manual labor and/or special expertise. For example, generation of settlement files for an interbank exchange. By the way, another benefit of using helpers is that boring tasks like the repetitive creation of a new user account can exhaust a person faster than a creative task like generating a new test case. Hence, helpers not only save time, but also enable manual testers to be mentally less tired and thus more productive. As you can see, a test automation engineer who writes helpers can save millions of dollars for his company. And the monetary savings is the primary reason to write test automation in the first place. Lesson recap. 1. Test automation for regression testing comes in 2 forms: helpers, automation scripts. 2. It's usually harder and more important to decide what to automate rather than how to automate. 3. Helpers are loved by everybody because they are a real help in the manual execution of everyday routine tasks. Sometimes testing is not possible without helpers. Credit card generator. 4. The number one enemy of test automation is maintenance. 5. Test automation maintenance has two roots. Software is always changing, thus the test automation must be changed too. Test automation can be poorly designed, so even a small change in the tested software can affect its maintenance. 6. Helpers are less prone to maintenance than automation scripts because they don't test software, they automate tasks around testing. 7. API is a way software parts talk to each other.